One of the important things that we should all bear in mind is with current events and the way things are in the world and in American politics, we need to be knowledgeable about what is going on in the world. And having speakers like we've had, speakers like Yoram, are really important to be educated as to what's going on. I'm looking around for the men. Why don't you guys start passing the plates to the crowd. Let me give you a little introduction to Yoram. He is retired from the Israeli Foreign Service. Just pass the, yeah. He is retired from the Israeli Foreign Service. He was here in Houston in the late 80s as the Consul General. He went on to serve in the embassy in Washington, D.C., and retired out with the rank of ambassador, and since then he has served as a consultant and lecturer. He's been a consultant for various subcommittees in the U.S. Congress as well as the Knesset, and he just has an encyclopedic control of the information and data related to what is going on in the Middle East. So he is going to talk this evening about the impact of this American presidential election on the U.S.-Israel relationship. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ambassador Ettinger.
Thank you. Thank you very much, especially Pastor Robbie Dean, whose commitment to the cause of enhancing U.S.-Israel relations is second to none, and that the current seminar is only a reflection of how tenacious Pastor Robbie Dean has been. We are talking today on September 11, and this is a major day of commemoration which behooves us, namely members of the free world, members of Western democracies, to make a decision rather than repeating mistakes, avoiding mistakes. And one of the mistakes has been the misreading of the threat to this country in particular, but the whole free world in general, emanating not from lone wolves and not from occasional acts of terrorism, but from Islam-driven terrorism, which has reflected an increasing number of rogue regimes and rogue groups operating throughout the world, including on the mainland in Europe and in the USA. And certainly there was a writing on the wall between September 11. There is a writing on the wall at this stage. And it seems to me that rather than approaching the threat in an ambiguous term, defining it as workplace violence or symptoms of radicalism or frustration-driven violence, it's time to avoid ambiguity and be very clear. This has been Islam-driven terrorism. And when you look at the individuals involved, at the regimes involved, organizationally or nationally, they have followed the most fundamental tenets of Islam, dividing the world into the abode of the believer and the abode of the infidel, making it very clear that the infidel, as well as the apostate within Islam, must submit to the believer, to the abode of believer, They've made it very, very clear that it's the duty of every Muslim to engage in a holy war in order to introduce the laws of Islam, the Sharia laws, into an increasing number of countries vying for a complete global influence, and while obviously preferring the expansion of Islam through peaceful means. But should the infidel resist peaceful integration, accepting a position of dhimmi, namely second-class individual, then the only option available is a war. And that war must be launched through conventional military, through terrorism, through subversion. Sometimes, again, according to Islam, you have to recognize the balance of power and therefore sign an agreement. But the agreement, according to Islam, not according to ISIS or to Hezbollah, but according to Islam, that agreement must not cloud the strategic goal. And the strategic goal, once again, must be the domination of humanity by Islam. And once the balance of power changes in favor of Islam or the Muslim entity, then such a tactical agreement must take back seat to the strategic goal and therefore be violated, be abrogated. And the ways and means to do that include also doublespeak, include what Muslims call taqiyya, which again is in accordance with the legacy of the Prophet Muhammad and the legacy of the Quran. And that is in a way a commandment, an instruction upon the believers to use doublespeak in order to mislead the non-believer. And such tactics also include immigration. And immigration, which according to Western values, according to free society values, is a very, very enlightened type of undertaking. You're elevating the position of people through immigration. You absorb, you assist. When it comes to the legacy of the Prophet, there is the immigration into a new area. In the old days, 7th century, from Mecca to Medina, not in order to be integrated, but in order to bring them to submission, gain power, and control both Mecca and Medina. And we have seen such practice in Europe, and according to my humble opinion, we're going to see it expanding beyond Europe as well, all under the guise of innocent attempt to immigrate into the advanced economies. I mention all that because there is a power, a superpower, which is the USA, which is able to fight, to combat, to withstand that effort, but that is a mission which is possible only by maintaining those attributes which have made the US an exceptional society, exceptional morally, exceptional technologically, exceptional medically, exceptional economically, exceptional agriculturally, and exceptional also militarily. The foundation of that exceptionalism has been faith. When one goes today to France, as I did 2 years ago, and I keep hearing from people who are in France right now, on Sunday, churches in France are empty. And when I asked some Christians in France, how come? The response was very brief. There is no more faith in God in France. And there is a definite correlation between faith in God in general and quality of society. Whether it is Christian belief in God, Jewish belief in God, but the belief in God, faith in God, faith in general, has made a difference in humanity. And when we are observing now the commemoration of September 11, we should realize that the most critical way of overcoming the threat is by maintaining the level of faith and the derivatives of faith, both politically and economically and obviously educationally and militarily, in the battle against rogue societies, rogue regimes, represented today by Islam-driven movements and terrorism. When one talks about this November election and the relation to faith and to US-Israel relations, in my mind, irrespective of whoever is going to be elected in November, I foresee an expansion of US-Israel relations, geostrategic relations, economic relations, scientific relations, technological, agricultural, irrigation, etc., whether it's going to be blue or red White House. And the reason I mention that, while I'm aware of the very, very significant differences between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, between the Democratic candidate and the Republican candidate, while I'm aware of that, I'm also aware of the forces which have created what I call the covenant between the American people and the Jewish state. And that covenant is in a way a fixture, while geostrategic considerations and assessments do change in time, since the conditions throughout the world, the circumstances, do change in time. And when one talks about the foundation of that covenant, one may go back to 1891, 6 years before the first Zionist Congress was convened by Theodor Herzl, the father of modern-day Zionism. But 6 years before that Zionist Congress was convened, 400 leading American personalities, including the Speaker of the House, majority and minority leaders of both chambers in Washington, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, other justices of the Supreme Court, governors, mayors, major Christian and major Jewish leaders, 400 of them signed a petition referred to or named after the pastor who initiated it, the Blackstone Memorial. And the Blackstone Memorial called 6 years before Herzl's first Zionist Congress for the reconstruction of Jewish homeland in the land of Israel. I assume if smartphones would be available then, the shape of Israel today would be different. The road towards re-establishing a Jewish state would have been much easier. But I assume that Theodor Herzl was not fully aware, if at all aware, of the huge support in America, in the USA, to the idea of reconstructing the Jewish Commonwealth in the land of Israel. 1891 is not the beginning of that covenant, it's an extension. It's an extension of what has been the American story. And the American story, in my mind, based on my studies, and there are people here with much more background and knowledge in that issue. Mel Dow here certainly is much more of a scholar on these issues than I have been, and so is Pastor Robbie Dean. But according to the way I have observed the American story, the history of the USA from the early 17th century until today, this is a unique story in humanity, unique in the free world. It's unique in the sense that there is, definitely is, separation between religion and state. But uniquely among free societies, there is absolutely no separation between religion and society. And that's, in my mind, the secret of the factor of faith in this country, which has made this American society as significant as it has been in humanity, and also has tied it to what is called today the reconstructed Jewish homeland on the land of Israel. Because when you look at the foundation of this country, going back to the early pilgrims until today, we're talking to a large extent about Judeo-Christian ideals which have shaped the morality, the justice system, the political system in this country. And that concept of Judeo-Christian values has been based on the Bible as a whole, but maybe to a large extent on the book of Deuteronomy, which we study. We Jews study this recent weeks. We are about to conclude Deuteronomy, to conclude the study of the 5 books of Moses upon the celebration of the new year. And interestingly enough, this week, the name of this portion of the Torah is upon launching a war. And previous week discussed also the notion of war. And the discussion of war, according to Deuteronomy and according to the 5 books of Moses and the Bible as a whole, has never had negative connotation, has always been part of the duties of people to be willing, when necessary, to launch a war, what we would call today in modern life preemptive war or war of defense. In fact, the way you spell the Hebrew word for war, milchama, you see that the root of the Hebrew word for war is identical exactly to the spelling of bread. And there is a reason for that, because you don't just fight to grab land, you don't fight to decimate people, you don't fight to subordinate other people, as indeed has been the recent story of Islam-driven terrorism. You fight in order to protect your bread, to protect your home. Moreover, that spelling of bread, or the root of war, milchama in Hebrew, is exactly also the verb to forge, to coalesce. Namely, upon launching a war, you are performing an act which further coalesces the people around the need to defend the nation, around the need to advance positive values, not in order to advance negative value, to subordinate, to annihilate, to vanquish, etc. We are talking about, in fact, in last week's portion of the Bible, about certain exemptions. You can delay your conscription if you just married, if you just built a house, if you just planted your orchard, but then there is no suspension but full exemption. Namely, if you are faint-hearted, you are exempted. We don't want you, because we don't want faint-heartedness in among the warriors. And this is very relevant to today when we do face the clear and present machete of Islam-driven terrorism at the throat of Western societies. This is not the time for faint-heartedness, for ambiguity. This is a time for very clear thinking, or I would say clear vision. Do we or don't we read the writing on the wall? Do we or don't we want a repeat of September 11? And here I can borrow from the Texas experience, which I inherited during my undergraduate studies, and then serving as Israel's Consul General here and visiting Texas 3-4 times a year. There is the Texas colloquialism or maybe even statute. You don't get off the horse precisely when the horse is bucking. At this time, when Islam-driven terrorism is bucking, this is the time to sit tight and not to demonstrate faint-heartedness and not indecision and not to try and get off or jump off the horse, because this is when you are mostly vulnerable. And in fact, the portion of the Torah which talks about the need to avoid faint-heartedness also talks about the trust. You have to trust God. You have to trust, to put your trust in faith. You will be able to overcome the threat if you again see it clearly, define it clearly. Without too much elaboration, I would say that those elements, they are the fixed elements behind the covenant between the American people on one hand and the Judaism and the Jewish people and the Jewish state on the other hand. Those elements are much, much more important than the policy of today and the threat of today and the challenge today, all of which are very important, but not as important as the principle and values which shape our societies, the American societies on one hand, and the overall Jewish society, or specifically the Jewish society in Israel on the other hand. In addition to that most fundamental element shaping the covenant between the American people and the Jewish state, we also have the geostrategic reality in the world, which is much more important than the tenuous focus by a president for specific week, for specific year, or even specific 4 years. The interest of this country, the USA, transcend by far the ideology of a president towards Israel, towards Jerusalem, towards Jewish settlements in Judea, Samaria, towards the Palestinian issue. As important as those issues are, they are in a way dwarfed by the challenges facing America today in face of Islam-driven terrorism, in face of the clear and present danger to every single pro-American Arab regime in the Middle East, whether it is Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Abu Dhabi, Dubai, Bahrain, Oman. Each one of those pro-American regimes is facing a clear and present immediate machete at their throat. And once any of those regimes is replaced by any alternative, we are talking about, in my mind, devastation to American interest. A collapse of a regime in Jordan would not be limited to the boundaries of Jordan. A collapse of the regime in Jordan due to the geographic reality being sandwiched between different countries, sharing a very, very long border with the very vulnerable Saudi Arabia, would mean an immediate spillover into Saudi Arabia, into Abu Dhabi, Dubai, Kuwait, and the rest of them, probably into Egypt as well. And once again, potentially devastating American interest, advancing the interest of the rivals and the enemies of the US in the Middle East and beyond, whether it is Iran, whether it is North Korea, whether it is China or Russia. We are talking about the current state of the world, which highlights the significantly enhanced role by Israel in the service of very vital American national security. There was a reason years ago for a former chief of Air Force Intelligence, General Keegan, who referred to Israel as a country of 5 CIAs, because according to General Keegan, the service rendered by Israel to the US exceeded that which the US benefits from the CIA multiplied by 5. There was a reason for General Alexander Haig, former Secretary of State, former Supreme Commander of NATO, to refer to Israel as the largest American aircraft carrier, which doesn't require a single American on board. And he added, should there be no Israel in the Middle East, then the US would have to supplement that beachhead, that outpost, by deploying few more military divisions to the Middle East, by deploying few more real aircraft carriers to the Indian Ocean and the Mediterranean at the cost of anywhere between $15 and $20 billion annually. If you consider that statement by Alexander Haig, which I believe is doubly more significant today than it was during the 1980s and 90s when he enunciated that equation or that calculation, one may refer to Israel as a unique outpost which extends the hand of the United States at a time when the US cuts its defense budget in a most draconian manner, at a time when the US retreats from different platforms in the world. And when you consider the Al Haig 15 to 20 billion on one hand and the 3.1 billion US foreign aid to Israel on the other hand, then you realize that we're not talking about foreign aid, we're talking about an American investment with an ROI, return on investment, which is dramatic. 5, 6, 7 times of the actual investment. It's a unique ROI by all calculations. We're talking about Israel, which has been for many, many years the most battle-tested laboratory for the American defense industry. I stepped into an office of a congressman from Tennessee, Chattanooga, where there is a Northrop Grumman plant manufacturing robots which neutralize explosives. And the congressman said, ever since Israel announced its intention to buy that robot from Chattanooga, Israel rendered a service which is usually rendered by a AAA tenant in a shopping mall. Because if Israel wants it, then it must be the best assumed number of countries, and on the coattail of the Israeli purchase, more countries decided to buy that robot. But moreover, said the congressman, every other week the plant manager of Northrop Grumman holds conference calls with the Israeli experts who operate and maintain and repair the robots. And as a result of those actions by the Israelis, the research and development of Northrop Grumman in Chattanooga gained, according to the plant manager, some 5 or 10 years, if at all would have been possible to reach such research and development level, which is an outcome of Israel's unique circumstances, unique threats in the Middle East. And therefore, that research and development has enhanced the competitiveness of the plant in the global competition, and the bottom line has been expanded employment in his district. There are hundreds of American military systems employed by Israel benefiting in a similar manner. Certainly the benefits of the manufacture of the F-16 in Fort Worth, Texas, by far exceeds in volume of dollars that which is the benefit of Northrop Grumman in Chattanooga. Likewise, the manufacturer, McDonnell Douglas, of the F-15 in Missouri. There you're talking about mega billion-dollar benefits to the manufacturer as a result of the Israeli battle-tested laboratory, which enhances the quality of the F-15 and the F-16. As I was told by the plant manager in Fort Worth, Texas, some 50% of the cockpit is a result of Israeli upgrades or Israeli-driven upgrades. 75% of the firing control is based on the Israeli experience. I met a former commandant of the U.S. Marine Corps in Birmingham, Alabama, who told me that being an expert on battle tactic formulation, he knows, according to the commandant of the U.S. Marine Corps, that most of the formulation of battle tactics which emerges out of Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, is based on the Israeli book. Now, this is a service which is unique, namely deriving from the Israeli battle experience and introducing battle tactics which assist the Americans in their battles in Iraq and Afghanistan, in addition to the fact that special operation forces from the US to Afghanistan to Iraq stop for 3 weeks training in Israel, where they are trained by Israel's experts in defying suicide bombers, car bombs, and the improvised explosive devices. How much is it worth to America to benefit from such an experience? And talking with few such soldiers who came back, special operation soldiers from Iraq and Afghanistan, according to them, much of the credit to the fact that they came back to the US without a single fatality to their unit is attributed to those 3-week training in Israel. The same thing, by the way, has benefited the American commercial, non-military industry. We have today in Israel some 250 research and development centers serving the giants of the American high-tech industry. And the reason they do operate research and development centers in Israel is not to benefit from lower cost, because when it comes to research and development in the high-tech area, computer-driven professions, the cost of labor in Israel is not significantly lower than the USA. They do that in Israel in order to leverage the brain power in Israel. And according to the CEO of Intel, if not for the 4 research and development centers by Intel in Israel, Intel would have been decimated by the competition. Microsoft's CEO told his board of directors that by the day Microsoft becomes more and more an Israeli company due to the impact of Israel's newly developed cutting-edge applications and technologies upon the nature of Microsoft products. And same goes for various agricultural developments. The same goes for irrigation. We have today in the San Diego County in Southern California, we have a major Israeli company which is a world-class developer of desalination technologies, and they are responsible, they provide 9% of the water consumption in the San Diego County derived from their desalination technologies. And according to reports, those technologies have added to the cost of water in San Diego County less than half a cent per gallon used for drinking water. Those are few of many, many examples which today characterize the two-way street between US and Israel. And that two-way street, which is mutually beneficial, win-win reflection of US-Israel relations, have changed completely what used to be a one-way street. America extending a hand to Israel, which has been mightily appreciated by any Israeli and any friend of Israel. This has been replaced or transformed into a very busy two-way street which benefits both the US and Israel. Those elements, those derivatives of the world of today, both economically and militarily and terroristically, are much more powerful than are the worldviews of the Democratic or the Republican candidates for presidency. And certainly one cannot overlook a fundamental feature of American politics. With all due respect to the executive, the first article in the US Constitution is the legislature. And there is a reason for that. The founding fathers did not want an overly powerful executive branch of government, and therefore they provided the legislature with a co-equal, co-determining position in the American political system. Every single American president has pressured Israel. Some in a very brutal manner, military embargo, suspension of military systems, boycotting telephone calls, suspending visits, etc., and some more elegantly. But every single president has pressured Israel, from Truman all the way to Barack Obama, and including both of them. However, the relations between, or the cooperation between the two countries have surged to unprecedented levels. And supposedly it defies logic, Because if president after president pressures Israel, if president after president since 67 does not go along with Israel's policy on settlements in Judea, Samaria, on the reunification of Jerusalem, on the location of Israel's borders, how could cooperation surge to unprecedented level? And the reason, in my mind, is primarily the geopolitics or geostrategy of the world as a whole, which does lead even those presidents who disagree with Israel to cooperate with Israel. But primarily it has been the influence, the stature of Congress, which has been responsible to much of the expansion, to many or maybe even most of the innovative ideas of collaboration, and many times in defiance of American presidents, both red as well as blue presidents. Congress has followed that route when it comes to U.S.-Israel relations for a simple reason: the power and the centrality of the constituent in this country. Most House members and most senators do support Israel. My own estimate, 70% plus do support expanded U.S.-Israel cooperation. And they do that primarily because they know those are the sentiments of the constituents. And the sentiments of the constituents go back to the foundation of values, of principles, which go back to the Mayflower's arrival to the U.S., which go back to the Arabella, which goes back to the founding fathers of this country. And when the founding fathers established the system in this country, they called it the Federalist system. But there's no such thing as a European system which has any name close to Federalist. There's no precedent, as far as I know, to any system in the free world which has a title similar to the Federalist. The reason they called it the Federalist system, because many of them spoke Latin, and in Latin the term fedus refers to the covenant between God and Abraham, God and Jacob. And because the founding fathers considered themselves to be the people of the modern day covenant, hence the decision was to refer to it as the system of the covenant, or the Federalist system. And this, in my mind, has shaped the foundation of the American people's attitude towards Israel, and therefore Congress towards Israel. And it has taken some interesting forms, and one can define it as a fluke, or maybe there are some powers. But the fact is that the backbone of the American system is liberty. And according to the founding father, the concept of liberty largely, not totally, but largely, is based on the concept of the biblical Jubilee. And when it comes to Jubilee from the book of Leviticus, we're talking about 50 years. And don't we have 50 states in the United States? And more than that, we're talking about Israel, which has one Jerusalem. In the US, there are 18 Jerusalems and 32 Salems. Salems, or Shalem in Hebrew, that's the original name of Jerusalem. And we know what's the sum of 18 plus 32. And when one spells Jerusalem, interestingly enough, when we spell it in English, at the heart of the word Jerusalem, we have three very distinct letters, USA. Now, maybe it's a fluke, maybe it's not, but this is a reality. And last and not least, in Hebrew, the name of the United States is not a translation of those two words. In Hebrew, the name of the United States is Artzot Habrit, the states of the covenant, which leads us one more to the foundation, to the cement of this country and to the cement of US-Israel relations, cement which once again is much more powerful than politics and ideology of the moment, and therefore my conclusion is we all should be looking at the future of US-Israel relations optimistically and positively, because it is going to grow as a result of those foundations. Obviously not if all of us will be complacent. Precondition is for us to roll up our sleeves and make sure that those foundations, those values and principles are going to be as vibrant today as they used to be, at least as they are now, and not to allow them to be demoted by certain elements of political correctness. I would like to end here, and I trust that there are opinions, questions, especially those of you who would like to rebut some of the opinions I expressed.
Okay, well, thank you, Yoram, very much. That was excellent as always. I'm sure there's one or two questions. If anybody is ready, who has a question? All right.
And again, not only question. Don't be bashful.
Questions, comments.
That's it. Comment
and argue.
And don't treat me as a guest, but as they say in Texas, don't only shoot straight, talk straight.
Sir, it's a pleasure and an honor to have you speak before us, and I would like to say that I'm a retired U.S. Marine, and I want to say on behalf of this group and most of Americans, we wish to apologize for the deal that our president cut with the nation of Iran that jeopardizes the safety of Israel. Please forgive us.
I would like to refer to your statement, which on one hand I appreciate, but on the other hand I would like to correct it in a fundamental way. Iran would have strived to develop nuclear capability with or without Israel in the Middle East. The reason Iran pursues that strategy has, in my mind, nothing to do with Israel. Israel could be a byproduct, but not the real thing. Iran wants to acquire the mega capability, nuclear, in order to advance their mega historical goal, going back to the 7th century and even before that. And that goal is the domination of the Persian Gulf, the Middle East, the Indian Ocean, and throughout the world. And in order to achieve that mega goal, they therefore develop the mega capability, which would enable them, so they believe, to remove the mega obstacle. And the mega obstacle is not the state of Israel. The mega obstacle is what they call the arrogant, modern-day crusader, great Satan of America. Those are the adjectives which they attribute to the US in their curriculum. And the curriculum, in my mind, is the most effective reflection. Thank you. I thought I'll have a nice sandwich from Kenny and Ziggy and just water. And when we go back to the debate in this country over the agreement, what I found lacking was the fact that out of genuine concern and out of that covenant between the American people and the Jewish state, the focus was shifted from the real target for Iran, namely the USA, to a secondary or tertiary or fourth-rate target. For the US, the agreement, which was concluded in April of 2015, was a binding strategic agreement of peaceful coexistence with Iran. However, for the Ayatollahs, this was a very provisional, tenuous, tactical agreement which is aimed at pushing the US away from the Gulf, at threatening the US, at planting faint-heartedness in the hearts of Americans who, according to the Iranians, are gradually losing confidence in their confrontation with Iran, thereby achieving their goal. And I think we better wake up to the reality that a nuclear Iran would be a clear and present danger to Iran much before it is a clear and present danger to Saudi Arabia or Kuwait or Abu Dhabi or Israel.
All right, thank you. Next question.
Two questions. How much cooperation in terms of military academies is there between Israel and the U.S.? In other words, I know that foreign governments send their young people to our military academies, because I'm the widow of a U.S. Navy nuclear submarine captain who went to Annapolis. Does Israel send students to West Point, Annapolis, the Air Force Academy, or do we send our students to you? Maybe you can't say, but that's one of the questions.
No, I don't. Oh, she has another one. Another question, or that was?
Okay. And the other one is, you didn't mention the cooperation going on in the healthcare industry, pharmaceuticals, drugs, that kind of thing. I've heard a bit about that, and I wonder if you could say some more about it. Thank you.
Okay. When it comes to military academies, I don't pretend to be knowledgeable about this specific issue, but I am aware of very tight relations between the military establishment in this country and the counterpart in Israel, whether it is Air Force, which is most intense cooperation, including many joint maneuvers exercises, all the way through Navy and special operations, etc. One thing which brings me back to the foundation of U.S.-Israel relations is the existence of 3 busts of the heads of major Jewish historical military leaders in the headquarters of West Point. At the headquarters, they have 9 busts, which West Point refers as the 9 worthies. The most successful, the most effective military leaders in human history. Among them, Joshua, King David, and Judah the Maccabee. And once again, I believe that highlights that covenant between the two peoples, American people and Jewish people, and the Jewish state. When it comes to medical and health collaboration, again, I don't have the specifics other than 2. One of them is the proliferation of medical and health tech American societies in Israel, establishing their research and development centers, increasingly acquiring Israeli startups, increasingly investing in Israeli startups. That's one example. The other one is our youngest daughter, who works for Teva. Teva is the world's largest generic pharmaceutical company, and my daughter works in the international division. She travels plenty, including in this country from the West Coast to the East Coast. She just came back from Peru, and all those areas have benefited, again, from groundbreaking, game-changing Israeli innovations in the area of pharmaceuticals and health.
Okay, do I have another question? All right.
Yoram, excellent presentation. Good to see you again. Question, I have a friend who's currently working on some of the oil developments in offshore. I wonder if you could comment on the status of some of the oil and gas developments that are going on now.
I don't have much. I don't have more information than is reported by the media. I, like most Israelis, long for an end to the too long negotiation process. Apparently, we do have the resources there. This is the first time that the term scarcity of resources does not apply to Israel when it comes to natural gas. If and when, not if, but when it's going to be fully exploited, it's going to further enhance the performance, the economic performance of Israel, possibly will enhance ties between Israel and Jordan, Israel and Egypt, provided that the current regimes in Egypt and Jordan will sustain themselves, and this is not to be taken for granted. It could even improve ties between Israel and Turkey, but I cannot share with you beyond that because I simply do not know. Since we're talking about natural gas as a substitute for oil in this case, I would say that when it comes to oil, in a different context, we get it out of an olive. But the way we get oil out of an olive is not by caressing the olive, is by pressuring the olive. And this has been the Jewish story, this has been the Israeli story. Namely, Jews in general, Israel in particular in recent years, have benefited humanity in a very dramatic manner, not because humanity has been kind to Jews or to the Jewish state, but it is pressure which brings the best out of people when pressure is approached constructively, namely an opportunity in disguise. Israel would not be the startup nation if we would not be burdened by scarcity of natural resources. Give you an example. Today in Israel, we have dramatically less waterfall than we had back in 1948 when Israel was established. Today, however, we have 11 times more people than we had when Israel was established. So while we have dramatically less natural waterfall and 11 times more people, we have an all-time high water reserve which preclude any urgent needs for people to economize on the use of water in their home. Now, this supposedly defies logic, but who say that Jewish state acts logically? And the reason is, again, under pressure, we have become world leader in the development of irrigation technologies and development of water-related technologies, including desalination, including, by the way, recycling of sewage. Today, It may sound very unpleasant to some, but it's a reality. We have achieved a level of recycling sewage which doesn't only fit agriculture, which we use it today, but also human consumption. And when I say that it fits human consumption, not according to an Israeli opinion, in every recycling station in Israel, sewage recycling, we have European inspectors, because we export to Europe a lot of produce, and they want to make sure that the Israeli agriculture benefits from quality, top quality water. And as a former member of the board of one of the largest Israeli water companies, I can tell you that I drank that water. Maybe that's the reason my worldview has tilted certain way. But today, 80% of our sewage is recycled for agriculture, and 75% of our agriculture benefits from recycled water. It wouldn't happen if we would not exist under the threat of scarcity of natural waterfall.
All right, we have time for one more question.
I think that young man here from Canada.
When you first started your presentation, you mentioned immigration, and given the challenges that Germany has had with their Syrian refugee policy, and Britain has had with leaving the EU because of immigration as being one of their key issues, can you kind of share your thoughts about our immigration policy when it comes to the Syrian refugees?
30 years ago, I spoke with a friend of mine in France, and my contention to him was that France was making a big mistake approaching Muslim immigration into France as if it is another form of immigration wave. And I mentioned to him that one has to make a distinction between, for instance, immigration of Jews to Israel, immigration of Hispanics from Mexico to America, immigration of Japanese and Chinese to America, and many other people who have come to America and to Israel in order to be integrated and thus have enriched both countries through their own brain power and manpower in general. When it comes to immigration in the context of Islam, as I mentioned before, it has a different connotation, different interpretation according to Islam. That friend of mine from France accused me of Islamophobia. He does not any more. Now, a reason I mention that is because it seems to me that this country should examine immigration precedents in Europe and conclude certain lessons for immigration policies in this country. Ignoring the European precedents and the consequences on homeland security in Europe, and potentially on a potentially suicidal process of certain societies in Europe, could bring upon the US a very, very significant damage. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Okay, at this point, we're going to take a 10-minute break, and then we're going to show a video. You're going to want to see the video. I'll introduce it when we come back, and it's a 20-minute video, and then we'll be concluding the conference for this year. So we'll have a quick break, use a restroom, get some water, grab a cookie, and we'll be ready for the video in 10 minutes. Thank you.